The late afternoon sun hung low over the Texas plains, painting the world in a glow of dying gold. The wind moved across the tall grass like a restless sea, whispering secrets only the land could hear. Riding through it came Rhett Callahan, a man molded by solitude. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and quiet. The kind of man who didn't waste words because life had already taken too many from him. His days began and ended with the creak of saddle leather, the whistle of cattle, and the sigh of a land too big for one man to tame. That evening, as he guided his horse toward the ridge near the creek, something caught his eye, a shape that didn't belong. At first, Rhett thought it was an animal, maybe a stray dog or a coyote. But as he got closer, he saw the outline of a woman lying motionless in the dust near the water's edge. He dismounted fast, boots crunching the dry earth, and knelt beside her. Her dress was torn, her hands scratched raw from thorns. Mud streaked her cheek and tangled hair clung to her face. She looked barely alive. Rhett touched her wrist. Her pulse was faint but steady. A sigh of relief escaped him, more instinct than emotion. "Miss?" he said softly, though his voice hadn't been used much lately. She didn't answer. Her lips moved slightly, whispering something he couldn't make out. He tried again, but her eyes stayed closed. With a grunt, he lifted her gently into his arms, surprised at how light she was, like she'd been running on nothing but fear and willpower. The ride back to his ranch was slow and tense. The woman stirred once, murmuring in her sleep, her hand flying to her throat as if to protect something there. Rhett noticed a thin leather ribbon tied snugly around her neck, the ends hidden beneath her collar. He didn't give it much thought then, only that she guarded it even in her sleep. By the time they reached the ranch, dusk had settled in. Rhett carried her into the cabin, laying her on the spare bed near the fire. He poured water, wiped the dirt from her face, and covered her with a quilt his late mother had made. The firelight flickered over her features, young, maybe mid-20s, but marked by exhaustion deeper than her years. He sat back, uncertain what to do next. He wasn't used to company, much less a half-dead stranger, but leaving her out there hadn't been an option. So he waited, listening to the rain start tapping on the roof. Hours passed before she stirred again. Her eyes opened wide and wild, blue like storm clouds. She gasped, pressing herself against the wall, clutching at her throat. Don't take it off," she whispered hoarsely. Rhett froze, his hands raised. "Ain't no one taking anything off, ma'am," he said, voice calm as still water. Her breathing was ragged, eyes darting around the room until she recognized where she was. Her shoulders sagged slightly, though she didn't relax. She kept one hand on her neck, fingers trembling over the leather ribbon. "You're safe here," Rhett added quietly. "No one's gonna hurt you." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then her gaze softened just a little, studying him as if trying to decide whether to believe him. When she finally spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "I didn't mean to come here. I just couldn't keep running." Rhett nodded once, understanding more than she could know. He didn't ask where she came from or what she was running from. The fire popped softly, filling the silence between them. Outside, the storm gathered, thunder rolling far off in the distance. Inside, two strangers sat in the flickering light, one too scared to speak her past, the other too kind to demand it. And for the first time in a long while, the lonely rancher didn't mind the company. Morning crept slowly over the Callahan ranch, spilling gold through the thin curtains of the spare room. Clara woke to the unfamiliar scent of wood smoke and coffee, her heart pounding before she even opened her eyes. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Only the echo of hoofbeats behind her, the harsh voice shouting her name, the sting of hands that had once claimed ownership. Then she heard it, the rhythmic sound of boots outside the cabin, steady and unhurried. The stranger, the man who had brought her here. She sat up fast, the quilt slipping from her shoulders. Panic surged through her until she saw the folded shirt on the chair, clean and dry, left there for her. Beside it sat a tin cup of water and a small plate with bread. The simple kindness unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. Cruelty she understood. Kindness made her tremble. Her fingers flew to her neck. The leather ribbon was still there. She felt for the knot, tight and secure. Relief flooded her, but it was short-lived. What if the man had seen it while she slept? What if he knew what it meant? The door creaked. Rhett stepped in, pausing when he saw her awake. He didn't say anything right away. His gaze was level, not soft, but not unkind either. "You're up," he said simply. "Figured you might want some breakfast." Clara flinched when he set a bowl of warm porridge on the table. Her eyes darted to the rifle hanging on the wall, the knife at his belt, the door. There were too many ways this could turn. Her voice came out small and strained. "Please!" "Don't take it off." Rhett froze mid-step. "What?" "The ribbon," she whispered, clutching her throat. "Please, don't take it off." He frowned, confusion shadowing his face. "Ain't planning to take anything off, miss." He pulled out a chair and sat, resting his forearms on his knees. "You're safe here. That's all." Her breathing steadied, but she still didn't eat. She kept her back to the wall, watching him as if he might vanish or change. The silence stretched, broken only by the ticking of an old clock. Rhett didn't push her. He'd lived long enough to know that fear like that didn't come from nowhere. He just talked quietly about simple things, the horses, the weather, the storm that rolled through the night. He told her the nearest town was a day's ride west, and that the land around here didn't get many visitors. Little by little, her eyes lost that hunted look. When she finally spoke, it was barely more than a whisper. "You found me by the creek?" He nodded. "You were half buried in the mud. Looked like you hadn't eaten in days." Clara lowered her gaze. "I hadn't." She hesitated, then added, "I didn't mean to trouble you. I'll leave soon as I can walk again." Rhett looked toward the window. "You can leave when you're ready." "But out there," he gestured toward the open land, "ain't much waiting but more hurt. You might want to rest a spell first." His tone was steady, matter-of-fact, without pity. Somehow that made it easier for her to breathe. When he left the room, closing the door gently behind him, Clara finally let the tears come. They weren't the loud, desperate kind, just quiet ones that slipped down her cheeks as she pressed her hands to her throat. Beneath the ribbon, her skin still burned from where it had been cut, where ownership had been branded into her flesh. But for the first time in months, no one demanded she bow her head. No one shouted her name like a curse. There was only the sound of wind and the low hum of a man's voice outside, humming a tune while feeding his horses. And though fear still lived in her bones, a new feeling began to stir beneath it, something small, fragile, but dangerously close to hope. Days passed in a hush of uneasy peace. Clara stayed mostly inside the cabin, her world reduced to the four walls that both sheltered and trapped her. Outside, Rhett worked the ranch as usual, feeding the horses, mending fences, driving cattle toward the north pasture. He rarely spoke, but she heard him often, the soft thud of boots on the porch, the scrape of a bucket, the low murmur of him talking to his mare. His silence wasn't cold. It was steady, almost protective, like the earth itself keeping watch. Clara began to help in small ways, folding linens, sweeping floors, tending to the fire. At first her movements were nervous, every creak of wood making her flinch, but Rhett never raised his voice or asked too many questions. He gave her space, and that space slowly began to heal something inside her that she hadn't realized was still alive. The belief that quiet didn't always mean danger. One afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled in from the west. The sky turned black, and the air smelled of wet earth and fear. The first clap of thunder made Clara drop the tin cup she was holding. It shattered, and she backed into the corner, eyes wide, arms raised instinctively. Rhett turned at the sound, startled by the look on her face, the same look he'd seen in wounded animals. "Easy," he said softly, setting down his tools. "It's just thunder." She shook her head, trembling. "He used to come when it stormed," she whispered. Said no one would hear. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Rhett froze, the hammer still in his hand, understanding dawning in his eyes. He'd suspected she'd been hurt, her flinches, her nightmares. The way she guarded that ribbon, but hearing it, even in fragments, cut deeper than he expected. He set the hammer aside and knelt by her, but not too close. "You ain't there now," he said firmly. "You're here." No one's coming for you tonight." For a long moment, she just stared at him, her breath coming fast. Then slowly she nodded, pressing her palms to her eyes. The storm roared outside, rain drumming on the roof, but inside the cabin, the silence between them softened. That night, as lightning flashed through the cracks of the shutters, Clara found herself speaking again. Maybe it was the storm, or maybe it was Rhett's steady presence, but the words spilled out like confession. "I was married," she began, her voice trembling. "He was a ranch owner, rich, powerful. Everyone in town called him respectable. They didn't see what he did when the doors were closed." She touched her throat unconsciously, fingers brushing the ribbon. "When I tried to run the first time, he caught me. Said if I ever tried again, he'd make sure everyone could see who I belonged to." Rhett's jaw tightened. "That's what the ribbon hides," he said quietly. She nodded, tears glinting in the firelight. "He marked me. Burned it into my skin so no one would want me." Her voice cracked. "He said no decent man would ever touch a woman branded like me." For a long while, Rhett said nothing. The fire popped, shadows flickering across his face. Then, in a voice low but certain, he said, "You don't need a decent man, Clara. You need a good one." "There's a difference." She looked at him, startled by the simplicity of the words. They weren't promises or pity, just truth. When she finally lay down to rest, the storm had passed. The air was fresh, the night quiet. Rhett stayed up a while longer, staring into the embers. He wasn't a man given to saving others. He barely knew how to save himself. But something about her felt worth protecting. And somewhere in the dark, Clara dreamed not of running, but of standing still without fear. The days that followed unfolded gently, like dust settling after a storm. Rhett didn't press Clara for more of her story. He didn't need to. He saw it in her eyes, the way she flinched at the sound of horses approaching, how her hands trembled when she lit the lantern, how she'd wake at dawn and check the locks before taking a breath of morning air. Her fear spoke louder than any confession could, so Rhett did what he knew best. He worked. And quietly, in the rhythm of his days, he began to build a world where she might feel safe. He repaired the old barn first. It had stood half-collapsed for years, its roof sagging and beams splintered. But now he rebuilt it, one board at a time. He didn't tell her it was for her, but when she found the small cot and fresh quilts inside, she knew. It gave her space, a place that was hers alone, close enough to feel secure, far enough to breathe. Clara began helping more around the ranch, though she moved like a ghost at first, silent and careful. She milked the goats, mended clothes, swept the porch. Every task was done with quiet determination, as if proving her worth to herself more than to him. Rhett watched without interfering, offering help only when she looked ready to collapse. He'd learned the hard way that some wounds didn't heal through touch, but through patience. One afternoon, as she hung laundry on the line, she heard hoofbeats on the dirt road. Her heart seized. A rider approached, a stocky man with a gray beard and a wide, crooked grin. Jed Hollis, Rhett's neighbor, known for his big mouth and small decency. He swung down from his horse, eyeing Clara with a look that made her skin crawl. "Well now," he drawled. "Rhett, didn't know you'd hired yourself some help. Pretty little thing, ain't she?" Rhett came out from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were hard. "She's not help," he said evenly. Jed chuckled, tipping his hat toward Clara. "Didn't mean nothing by it. Just thought maybe you'd found a reason to come down off that lonely hill of yours." Clara's breath caught. Old memories stirred, taunts, laughter, the sound of boots behind her. She stepped back, nearly tripping over the bucket. Rhett's gaze flicked to her, then back to Jed. "You done?" Rhett asked quietly. Jed grinned wider, clearly trying to provoke him. "Touchy, ain't you?" "Just making conversation." Rhett didn't raise his voice, didn't move fast. He simply stepped forward, close enough that Jed could see the steel in his eyes. "I said, you done?" Something in his tone made Jed's grin falter. He spat to the side, muttered something under his breath, and swung onto his horse. "Didn't mean trouble. You always were a strange one, Rhett. Keeping strays never ends well." The hoofbeats faded down the road, leaving silence in their wake. Clara stood frozen, her hand still clutching the bucket handle. She expected anger or questions, but Rhett said nothing. He just took the bucket from her, set it upright, and gave a small nod. "You all right?" he asked. She managed a shaky nod. "I thought he might." "He won't," Rhett interrupted, his voice steady as the earth beneath them. "Not while you're here." There was no fire in his words, no boast, just quiet certainty, and somehow that made her believe him. That evening, as the sun bled orange across the sky, Clara sat on the porch steps, watching Rhett mend a bridle by lantern light. The world around them felt still, almost peaceful. She realized then that protection didn't always come in the form of walls or weapons. Sometimes it came from a man who said little but meant every word he spoke. For the first time since she'd fled her old life, Clara didn't dread the sound of hoofbeats. She knew if anyone came for her again, they'd have to go through Rhett Callahan first. Autumn crept across the plains, and with it came a strange peace that felt almost fragile, like glass too thin to touch. Clara had begun to find rhythm in her days at the Callahan ranch. She cooked breakfast before sunrise, swept the porch, and helped Rhett mend fences when the weather was kind. Sometimes, when she forgot herself, Rhett would catch the faintest smile on her lips, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, yet beneath that calm unease lingered. Clara could feel it like a shadow at her back. The world had gone quiet, too quiet, and she knew from experience that silence often came before the storm. One crisp morning, she rode into the pasture with Rhett to check the herd. The land stretched wide and golden under the pale blue sky, the cattle grazing peacefully near the stream. Clara loved those rides. They gave her a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years. But that morning her gaze caught something strange near the fence post, a strip of torn paper fluttering in the wind. She dismounted, curiosity giving way to dread as she reached for it. The words, scrawled in rough handwriting, froze her blood. "She's his property. You can't hide her." The note smelled faintly of tobacco, the brand her husband used to smoke. Clara's hands shook so hard the paper nearly tore. She turned toward Rhett, panic rising in her throat. "Rhett!" she whispered. "He found me." Rhett rode up beside her, eyes narrowing as he took the note. His expression didn't change, but his silence spoke louder than anger. He crumpled the paper and tucked it into his coat pocket. "When?" she asked, her voice breaking. "When did he... How long..." "Doesn't matter," Rhett said quietly, scanning the horizon. "What matters is you're here and he's not." But Clara couldn't stop shaking. "You don't understand." "He'll come." "He always comes. He's got men, money, law on his side. They'll say I'm mad, that I belong to him." Rhett's jaw tightened. "You don't belong to anyone." Clara looked at him, desperation in her eyes. "You don't know him. He'll hurt you too." "I've been hurt before," Rhett said simply. "I ain't afraid of another scar." He turned his horse toward home, his calmness both a comfort and a mystery. But Clara's thoughts raced. She'd brought danger to his door, after all his quiet kindness, his patience, his silence. She couldn't bear to see him drawn into her darkness. That night she packed what little she had, a shawl, her locket, and a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. She waited until Rhett's lamp went dark and the ranch fell silent. But as she crept down the steps, the floorboards groaned beneath her weight. "Going somewhere?" Rhett's voice came from the shadows. He was leaning against the doorway, arms crossed, his face unreadable in the dim firelight. "I have to," Clara said, her voice trembling. "If I stay, he'll come for you too. I can't let that happen." Rhett didn't move. "You think running again will stop him?" Tears welled in her eyes. "It's the only thing I know how to do." He stepped forward, his tone firm but gentle. "You've been running so long you don't see it. You're already safe." "You just don't believe it yet." Her breath hitched. "Safe? There's no such thing for women like me." Rhett met her gaze, steady as a mountain. "There is here. I promise you that." Something in his voice made her freeze. It wasn't pride or pity, it was certainty. The kind that came from a man who meant every word he said. Clara sank to her knees, the weight of exhaustion and fear breaking her at last. Rhett crouched beside her, his calloused hand hovering near but not touching. "No one's taken you from this place," he said quietly, Not him. Not anyone! Outside, the wind howled through the canyons like an omen. The hidden threat had found its way to their door. But for the first time, Clara wasn't alone to face it. The morning after the note, the ranch felt different. Even the air seemed heavier, as though the land itself was holding its breath. Rhett went about his chores as usual, silent and deliberate. But his eyes were always scanning the horizon. Clara noticed it, the subtle tension in his shoulders, the way his hand lingered near his revolver, the horse's uneasy whinnies whenever a shadow crossed the fence line. She tried to hide her fear behind the rhythm of work, kneading dough, fetching water, feeding the chickens. But fear had a way of slipping through the smallest cracks, whispering reminders of what she'd escaped and what might still be coming. Every sound outside the cabin made her heart jolt. Every creak of the windmill sounded like a boot step. That afternoon, Rhett was in the stable tending to a wounded horse, a chestnut mare that had gotten tangled in barbed wire. Clara came to help, holding the bucket of water while he worked. His movements were steady, practiced, calm. Watching him, she almost forgot the ache of dread that lived in her bones. "Hold her steady," he murmured. Clara knelt beside the mare, whispering soothing words, her small hands brushing against the horse's trembling flank. Rhett reached over her shoulder to cut away a piece of tangled wire, and in that moment, the edge of his sleeve caught the leather ribbon around her neck. It snapped. The soft crack of it echoed louder than a gunshot in her ears. Clara froze, her hand flying to her throat, eyes wide with terror. The ribbon dangled from Rhett's hand, torn in two. "Clara," he started, but she stumbled back, clutching her neck as though the air itself had turned to fire. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. Don't take it off!" she cried, her voice raw and broken. Rhett froze. He hadn't seen her that afraid since the night he found her. Her whole body shook, tears welling as she pressed her hands against her skin. He could see now, even through her trembling fingers, the faint outline of a scar burned deep into her flesh. Letters, a mark branded by cruelty, forever carved into her. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The horse shifted nervously, snorting, but Rhett's voice came low and steady. "Clara, I didn't mean to—" She shook her head violently. "You don't understand. If anyone sees it, they'll know. They'll know what I am." Rhett's chest tightened. "And what are you?" he asked quietly. Her lips trembled. "His. He said I'd always be his. That no one else would ever touch me without seeing his name first." The words shattered something inside Rhett. He had seen a lot of cruelty in his life, war, famine, betrayal, but nothing like this. The mark on her neck wasn't just a wound. It was a sentence. He took a step closer, slow as a man approaching a frightened animal. "You listen to me, Clara," he said softly but firmly. "That mark don't mean a damn thing. Not here. Not to me." She looked at him through tears, disbelief flickering across her face. "You don't know what it's like to live with it." "I don't," he admitted. "But I know what it's like to carry something that don't belong to you anymore." He paused. "And I know no man owns you. Not while I'm breathing." Her breathing slowed, though her tears kept falling. Rhett held out the broken ribbon. "You can keep it if it helps, or burn it. But don't wear it because of fear. You ain't gotta hide anymore." For a moment, she stared at the torn strip of leather in his rough hand. Then, trembling, she took it and pressed it to her chest. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That ribbon was the only thing that made me feel invisible." Rhett nodded. "Maybe it's time folks saw you again." The words lingered in the air, soft but unshakable. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the stable in amber light, Clara stood taller than she had in months. The scar still burned, the past still hurt, but for the first time, someone had looked at it and not turned away, and that, she realized, was its own kind of healing. The days after the ribbon snapped were quiet, too quiet. The scar was no longer hidden, though Clara still touched her throat out of habit, as if the absence of the leather band left her exposed to the wind and the world alike. Rhett never mentioned it again, but she could feel his watchfulness, silent and steady, like a fence line built around her without her asking. But deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time before her past found her again. Men like her husband didn't let go. They didn't lose gracefully. They hunted. The warning came one evening as the sun bled into the horizon and the air turned still. Rhett was mending the corral fence when he heard the sound. Hooves. Several of them. Slow, deliberate. He looked up, squinting against the red light, and saw 3 riders cresting the ridge. Dust trailed behind them like smoke. Clara was on the porch, a basket of mended clothes in her lap. The moment she saw the riders, the color drained from her face. "It's him," she whispered. The basket slipped from her hands, the clothes scattering like fallen petals. Rhett didn't need to ask how she knew. The lead rider sat tall, proud, wearing a dark coat that caught the dying light. Even from a distance, there was something cruelly polished about his posture. The kind of man who never doubted his right to everything he saw. "Go inside," Rhett said quietly. Clara shook her head. "He won't leave unless he sees me." "I'll handle it," Rhett replied, his voice calm but iron-hard. He walked toward the gate, his revolver low on his hip, his hat shadowing his eyes. The 3 riders halted at the fence line. "Evening, gentlemen," Rhett said evenly. The man in the dark coat smiled. Thin, smug, familiar. "Evening," he drawled. "I'm looking for someone." "My wife. She ain't here," Rhett answered. The man's smile didn't falter. "I think she is. Name's Clara. Pretty little thing. Has a mark on her neck." His tone dripped with ownership. Every word meant to humiliate. Clara flinched from the porch, hands trembling at her throat. Rhett's jaw flexed. "You should turn around," he said quietly. The husband's eyes narrowed. "I have papers. The law says she's mine. You're harboring stolen property." Rhett's hand hovered near his gun. "You best choose your next words real careful, mister. She ain't property. Not yours. Not anyone's." A flicker of rage crossed the man's face. "You think you can stand between me and what's mine?" Rhett didn't blink. "Ain't thinking. I'm already doing it." The standoff stretched in the cooling air. One of the husband's men reached for his holster. The click of Rhett's revolver broke the stillness, swift, certain, like thunder before lightning. "Don't," Rhett said softly. For a moment, time froze. Then Clara stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "You're right," she said to her husband. "I was yours, but not anymore." The man's eyes snapped to her, disbelief twisting into fury. "You dare speak to me?" Rhett's revolver fired before the man could finish. The shot tore through the silence, sending the riders' horses rearing. The bullet hit the dirt inches from the man's boot. A warning. "Next one won't miss," Rhett said, voice steady as stone. The husband stared at him, rage burning behind his eyes, but he didn't move. He knew the look of a man who'd already decided to kill if pushed. With a curse, he turned his horse. "This isn't over, Callahan," he spat. "You'll regret crossing me." The men rode off, their silhouettes swallowed by the dusk. When the sound of hooves finally faded, Clara sank to the porch steps, shaking uncontrollably. Rhett holstered his gun and walked to her side. "He'll come back," she whispered. Rhett nodded. "Then we'll be ready." She looked up at him, her eyes wet but fierce. "You shouldn't have to fight my battles." Rhett's gaze softened. "Ain't your battle anymore. It's ours now." And as night settled over the ranch, Clara realized something she hadn't dared to believe. Her past had returned. Yes, but this time she wasn't facing it alone. Dawn came slow and heavy, painting the land in pale gray light. The air was still, the kind of quiet that follows danger but not peace. Rhett hadn't slept. He'd sat on the porch all night, rifle resting across his knees, eyes fixed on the horizon. Every sound, the groan of wood, the cry of a coyote, the whisper of wind through the grass, kept him on edge. Inside, Clara lay awake on the small cot, listening to the same silence. Her mind replayed the night before. The echo of gunfire, the rage in her husband's eyes, Rhett standing between her and everything she'd ever feared. She'd imagined that moment so many times in her dreams, but never believed it would come true. Yet even in her relief, guilt gnawed at her. Rhett could have been killed because of her. The ranch he'd built with his own hands was now marked by her past. When the first streaks of sunlight touched the window, she rose and stepped outside. Rhett was still there, motionless, a shadow carved from the dawn. His hat sat low over his eyes, his face rough with fatigue, but his hands were steady. "You didn't sleep," she said softly. He shook his head. Didn't see the point. Clara hesitated, then sank onto the porch beside him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The smell of damp earth filled the air, and the horses shifted restlessly in the corral. "He'll come back," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Rhett nodded once. "Maybe, but he won't find what he left behind." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" Rhett glanced at her, his eyes tired but clear. "You ain't that same woman anymore. You're not the one he marked or broke or chased across half of Texas. You're still standing. That's more than most can say." The words hit her harder than she expected. For so long, she'd seen herself as nothing but what her husband had made her, a runaway, a possession, a scarred thing. But Rhett's voice carried a truth she hadn't been strong enough to believe on her own. Her throat tightened. "You could have been killed," he shrugged. "Men like him think they own the world. Takes more than one bullet to teach 'em otherwise." Tears welled in her eyes. "You didn't have to protect me." He looked toward the open plains, the wind stirring his hair. "Maybe not. But I wanted to." That simple admission stole her breath. There was no grand declaration in it, no demand, no price. Just quiet truth, the kind that sank deep and stayed. After a while, Rhett stood and set his rifle aside. "I'll ride into town today," he said. "Get word to the sheriff." "Not that I expect much help." Clara looked down. "He's got friends in every county." Rhett gave a dry smile. "So do I. They just don't wear badges." Something about the way he said it, the quiet certainty, the calm strength, made her realize that Rhett had his own scars, too. Maybe they didn't show on his skin, but they lived in the way he carried himself. Two people, both marked by what the world had taken, now trying to build something new in its place. As he walked toward the barn, Clara began gathering the laundry that had blown off the line during the commotion. Her hands shook less than they had the night before. The land felt different now, not like a place to hide, but a place to start again. Later, when Rhett returned from town, he found her repairing the broken fence where the riders had stood. Her sleeves were rolled up, her face streaked with dirt, determination in every movement. "You don't have to do that," he said gently. "I know," she replied without looking up, "but I want to." Rhett watched her for a long moment, then picked up a hammer and joined her. They worked in silence, side by side, the way two souls might if words had long since failed them. When the sun began to set, Clara looked at the fence line, straight, strong, whole again. She realized something then. Healing wasn't about forgetting or running. It was about rebuilding what fear had broken, one board, one breath, one day at a time. And for the first time since she'd fled her old life, she believed she might actually be able to do it. The next few days passed in uneasy calm. Clara tried to bury herself in work, mending clothes, feeding the animals, tending to the vegetable patch, but no amount of labor could quiet the restless thoughts clawing at her mind. Every creak of the windmill made her flinch. Every dust trail on the horizon set her heart racing. Her husband's parting words, "This isn't over," lingered like a curse in the air. One afternoon, while cleaning the small chest by Rhett's desk, Clara found something that stopped her hands cold, a small silver locket dull with age and dust. She recognized it instantly, though she'd thought it lost forever. It had been hers once, a gift from her mother before her wedding. She had worn it on the day she was married, a young, hopeful girl with trembling hands and dreams far too big for the life she was walking into. Her husband had torn it from her neck during one of his rages, sneering that she didn't need childish trinkets to remember where she belonged. She had thought he'd thrown it away, yet here it was, resting quietly among Rhett's few possessions. Her throat tightened. Why did he have it? How long had he kept it? And why hadn't he told her? Rhett came in a moment later, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression softening when he saw her. "You all right?" he asked. Clara held up the locket. Where did you get this? He froze, the color draining from his face just slightly. Found it a while back, he said. Out near the creek. Figured it meant something. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, the tiny photograph was faded but still clear. A young woman and a man standing by a church. Her parents, smiling in the brief sliver of happiness life had allowed them. The sight pierced her like a blade. You should have told me, she whispered. I wanted to, Rhett said quietly. Didn't know how. She looked up, confusion and fear warring in her eyes. You went near the creek? He nodded. A few months back. Found signs of struggle, a broken chain in the mud. I didn't know it was yours until I saw you touch your neck that first night. Her heart pounded. That was where I ran, she said, voice trembling. Where I thought he'd kill me. Rhett's gaze softened. I figured as much. The silence that followed was heavy but not cruel. The truth of it all settled between them. He had known her pain long before she had spoken of it. He had seen the signs, the fear, the marks. And instead of pressing her, he had waited, patient and wordless, for her to come to it in her own time. Why keep it? She asked finally. Rhett looked down, his voice rough. Didn't seem right to throw away something that still had fight left in it. Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't look away. She turned the locket over in her hand, the silver warm from her touch. For the first time, she saw it not as a relic of pain, but as a bridge, a small shining thread that had survived both cruelty and loss to bring her here. I used to think it was cursed, she murmured. Every time I wore it, something bad happened. Rhett gave a faint smile. Maybe it just hadn't found the right hands to hold it. Clara's chest tightened. She took a shaky breath and then, with quiet deliberation, reached up and fastened the locket around her neck once more. The metal rested gently against her skin, above the faint scar where her old ribbon had once been. This time she didn't flinch. Rhett stepped closer, his hand brushing her shoulder. You don't have to hide it anymore, he said softly. I know, she whispered, and for the first time in years, the weight around her throat didn't feel like a shackle. It felt like freedom. As the evening light washed over the fields, Clara touched the locket again, thinking of her mother, of everything she'd endured, and of the man who'd helped her remember that she still had a life worth fighting for. But deep in her chest, she also knew something else. Her husband wouldn't stop. He'd return, not for love, but for possession. And when he did, there would be no running this time. She looked out toward the horizon, her jaw set, her heart steady. Next time, she whispered to the wind, I won't be afraid. The air that morning carried a strange stillness, the kind that comes before a storm. The sky was pale and heavy, and even the horses seemed restless, their ears twitching toward the horizon. Clara stood by the window, her hands clasped around the silver locket at her throat. The night before, she'd dreamed of running again, barefoot through the fields, the sound of hooves thundering behind her. But when she woke, she didn't feel fear this time. She felt resolve. Rhett had gone out early checking the fences and the cattle. Clara knew he was pretending it was an ordinary day, but she could see it in his eyes. He was expecting trouble. Her husband's threat had not been an empty one. Men like him didn't know how to lose quietly. By noon, the warning came, a dust trail rising on the road from the east. Rhett saw it first. They're back, he said simply. He didn't reach for his gun immediately, but his whole body tensed like a coiled spring. Clara felt her heartbeat steady, not quicken. How many? 4, maybe 5. He looked at her. You need to get inside. She shook her head. No, not this time. Rhett's jaw tightened. Clara, I can't protect you if I don't need protecting, she interrupted softly. Not anymore. For a long moment he stared at her. Then, with a small nod, he accepted it. Stay behind me, he said. When the riders reached the yard, dust swirling around their boots, the man in the dark coat dismounted first, her husband. His smile was cruel and too familiar. Told you it wasn't over, he said. His eyes flicked to Clara, lingering on the locket at her neck. You even took something that belonged to me. She met his gaze steadily. Nothing about me ever belonged to you, he sneered. That's where you're wrong. He turned his attention to Rhett. You had your fun, rancher. Now step aside. Rhett's voice was calm but unyielding. You'll leave this land and never come back. The man laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. Or what, you'll shoot me? Rhett didn't answer. He didn't have to. The way his hand hovered near his revolver said enough. But it wasn't Rhett who moved first. It was Clara. She stepped forward, the wind catching her skirt, her eyes burning with a quiet fire. You hurt me, she said to her husband, voice trembling but strong. You thought you could break me. But all you did was teach me how to stand. Her husband's smirk faltered. You think you can stand against me? Clara reached up and touched the locket. No, I stand against what you made of me. The man's rage snapped. He drew his pistol, but Rhett was faster. The shot echoed across the land, a crack that sent birds flying from the trees. The bullet struck the ground at the man's feet, a warning, but the second shot from one of his men tore through Rhett's shoulder. Clara screamed his name and dropped to his side. Blood bloomed across his shirt, but his grip stayed steady as he fired back. The man's henchmen scattered under his gunfire, leaving their leader exposed. Rhett's voice was low, raw with pain. End it, Clara. She looked up, her husband raising his weapon again, and in that moment, she saw the years of fear, the bruises, the nights she'd prayed to stop breathing. Her hands didn't shake as she picked up Rhett's dropped revolver. When she fired, the world went silent. Her husband fell back into the dust, his face frozen in disbelief. The others fled. Only the sound of wind and breathing remained. Rhett struggled to his feet, clutching his shoulder. Clara ran to him, tears cutting through the dust on her cheeks. You're hurt. I'll live, he rasped. She looked at the body in the dirt, then back at him. It's over, she whispered. He nodded, eyes softening. It's over because you made it so. As the sun broke through the clouds, Clara felt the weight lift, the years of silence, shame, and fear melting into the light. She looked out over the ranch, the land she now called home, and knew she'd never have to run again. She reached for Rhett's hand, holding it against her heart. No more hiding, she said. He smiled faintly. No more. And as they stood together in the quiet after the storm, the silver locket gleamed against her throat, not as a reminder of what she'd survived, but of what she'd reclaimed, her freedom, her courage, and the right to be unafraid ever again.